Winning. Welcome, everybody. We are ready for another learning session, learning Torah to get ready for Mashiach, to put ourselves in the right frame of mind. And we're looking specifically at the Parsha for inspiration and for direction to make it happen in our time in this week. So we've got three steps. Our first step is what's going on in the calendar. And the second step is what's going on in the Parsha. And the third thing we're looking for is a practical, relevant life message from this week's Parsha to empower us to do what we have to do in the best possible way, in the right frame of mind. What's going on this week in the calendar, anybody? Anyone feeling brave, doesn't mind unmuting and tell us something special is going on this week in the calendar? Did someone just say we're learning Torah? Say it again.
It's another double one.
Oh, it's another double parsha. That's fantastic. It is absolutely correct. Spot on. It's a double parsha. We had two last week, and we have two this week. And as we mentioned last week, when there are two parshas, it's double power. And we have more Torah energy to keep us going. Ein ois ela Torah. Anything else that we can think of that's going on? We had something special yesterday. Yesterday was the second day of Iyar. And the second day of Iyar was the birthday of the Rebbe Maharash. And the Rebbe Maharash, who was the Reb Shmuel, who was very famous for a lot of things. One of the things he's very famous for is what the Rebbe often quoted. I think in his times when he was Rebbe, it was less known. But the Rebbe often quoted a quote from the Rebbe Maharash in Yiddish, L'chatchila aribe, which means from the get-go, go straight over. And the Rebbe Maharash conducted himself and operated in that sort of way. And really the basis of what the approach is that if we believe very strongly that everything in our life and everything around us is only a mission from Hashem, every excitement, every gift, every bit of resource that we have, and equally every challenge, every opportunity, every disturbance, every redirection, it's always just another step in our journey towards Hashem's destination. Then getting worried isn't part of the plan. And getting bogged down is also not part of the plan. And therefore, grappling with the challenges is also not the way to do it. The way to do it is just to think, what would Hashem want from me right now? And storm forward for that. And the approach grows on us. The more we can live that way, the more we are determined that it's definitely going to work out. And it's definitely going to be good. The question is only what I need to do next. And if it doesn't seem to add up, that's not part of the equation. That's not part of the calculation. That approach isn't something that happens in a moment, in a quick knee-jerk reaction. That's something that builds in us and grows in us. And the Rebbe Maharash led his entire life this way, to the extent that he encouraged others to do so. And the Rebbe would always make a big deal out of l'chatchila ariba, the modus operandi of the teaching of the Rebbe Maharash, to teach us to do the same always in our life whenever there's a challenge, whenever there's something that has to be stormed through. That's one big thing this week. It happened on Sunday, yesterday, and today we're running along on that week. And then as we go through the week, there's obviously lots of very important things. I would say also this week we mark the 30-day marker from the big Yom Tov of Matan Torah. Shavuos will be on the 6th day of Sivan, and therefore on the 6th day of Iyar, which is 1 month in advance, we are already encouraged to start preparing for Shavuos. Now, this sounds much easier to talk about than talk about preparing for Pesach, because you talk about Pesach, different people have different, it means different things to different people, let's just say. But preparing for Shavuos, it seems much easier. But actually, preparing for Shavuos is exactly what we do from Pesach till Shavuos. We count the Omer every day, and we build up towards being ready for receiving of the Torah. Matan Torah is the receiving of the Torah, but it actually translates as the gifting of the Torah. The matan is like matana, the gifting of the Torah. Hashem gives us a gift, because however much we prepare, however much we get into the frame of mind, it's always much more than anything we were ready for. It's a matana all the same. And that's why on the 30-day mark of preparing for Shavuos, we're actually already on track. So what difference do we have practically when we say we prepare for Shavuos? It's a fun fact, and that is the halachas that are associated with the Yom Tov should begin to be revised already from Shavuos. A month before Shavuos, which is this coming week on the sixth day, which will be on Thursday. Okay, there's a little bit of what's going on in the calendar. Let's talk about what's going on in the parsha. And as we said, it's a double parsha, so we have a lot to get through. Achrei, Mos, and Kedoshim. Anyone want to guess what Achrei, Mos is talking about?
Not very nice things.
Okay, let's talk about one nice thing that's mentioned in Parshas Achrei.
Okay.
Go on, let's start off with one nice thing. It does say that took place Achrei Mos Shnei Bnei Aaron, after the passing of Aaron's two sons. But what happens next is actually very, very inspiring. We remember that we spent 4 or 5 weeks discussing the building of the house of Hashem. We also discussed that the holiest point in the house of Hashem is the Kodesh Kedoshim, the Holy of Holies, and it was off limits. It was off limits. It was so special, so private, so precious, nobody went in. And then last week we read how unfortunately not everyone of you did go in and didn't come out alive. And this week's parsha is a continuation of that, in which we learn that Hashem does have a method in which we can have a human being on our behalf enter the holiest space on earth, Kodesh HaKadoshim, Hashem's private personal room in this world, in the here and now. And that would be the Kohen Gadol, the high priest. Bezois Yaveh Aaron ala Kodesh. It's with this preparation and steps is with which Aaron may and is permitted and actually commanded to go into the Kodesh HaKadoshim. He would go in every year on Yom Kippur, and it's a very specific set of preparation he acts, including the different korbanos and the ketores, the incense that were brought in inside the Kodesh HaKadoshim, and all that is listed in this week, teaching us that actually the human being's ultimate place is to be absolutely united with Hashem. But we're not ready yet. So instead we have a representative who is the holiest person going into the holiest place, and that would generally be done on the holiest day of the year, as a representative of all of humanity, certainly of all of Klal Yisrael. Another big thing that is mentioned in the Yom Kippur service, because we're already talking about what Aaron had to do in order to prepare, is the story of the Geirol. The Geirol is a lottery, and the Torah is very specific about the lottery that would take place on Yom Kippur in the house of Hashem, and that would be 2 goats that looked identical, and each one of those goats were destined to go to a particular part of the service of Hashem. One would be destined to be brought on the Mizbeach, on the altar, as well as having its blood sprinkled inside the Holy of Holies. And the other goat was being sent away to the Azazel, and to the Azazel mountains, where it would be thrown off a cliff. And both of these were 2 sides to the atonement of Klal Yisrael, the atonement of the Jewish people on the holiest day of the year, the day of atonement, the Yom Kippurim, the day of Kapara. At the end of the parsha, Parshas Achrei Mos, the first parsha, also includes different types of warnings against bringing korbanos, animal or meal offerings, anywhere but within the house of Hashem. And what's fascinating is that at the time that the commandment was given, there was no specific geographical place that was the address of Hashem. And actually, the Mishkan was mobile, and it moved from place to place. And even when they made it to Eretz Yisrael, it took almost 500 years before this nominated place became a permanent place at Yerushalayim, a Har HaBayis. But already now we have the instruction that any carbon from that point and onwards could not be done in your own backyard. It couldn't be done in your local shul. It had to be only done in the house of Hashem, the Mishkan. We also learn about the ban on consuming blood, and the details of forbidden relationships, including incest and other sexual relations, which are not allowed in the Torah, very specific. And fascinatingly, we read that portion on Yom Kippur afternoon by Yom Kippur Mincha. Because however lofty and spiritual we are, it's very important for us, first of all, to not be ashamed of being human. And part of being human is also the temptation that comes with being human. It's a healthy sign of a healthy human being. It's tempted. And also teaches us that however lofty we may be, it's the small mitzvahs. The mitzvahs that some people might say, oh, those are the easy ones to keep. Or some people might say it's the more hard ones. But it's the practical mitzvahs where it's really at, where it really makes a difference. And that's the Parsha Achrei Mos, the first of the 2 parshas that we have in this week. The second parsha that we're reading this Shabbos is what you call a very loaded parsha with many, many details, many different mitzvahs listed in this week's parsha. The beginning of the parsha, though, doesn't even start with an opening of many mitzvahs. It starts with a very general mitzvah, if you like. And the Torah starts off, the name of the parsha is Kedoshim. And the parsha starts off by saying, Kedoshim Tiyu, that every single one of us are instructed to be specifically holy. And to be holy is an instruction for every single one of us. What does it mean to be holy? So you ask different people what it means to be holy. Some people say to do things that are spiritual. Some people say to do things holy means to do things that are written in the Torah. To do things holy might mean to spend a lot of time in shul. But actually, all the mitzvahs have their own mitzvah. All the different instructions are already instructed, each in their own place. Clearly, the instruction to be holy includes something more than that has been said before. So what is the instruction? How does one do becoming holy? So the Ramban tells us, Kadesh atzmecha b'mutar lach. Things that are not banned, they're not forbidden, they're not prohibitions. Things that are not an obligation, you don't must do it, but they're optional. And in life, there's many, many areas that are optional. Do you have to eat lunch every day? Do you have to go on a diet? Is it a mitzvah to go for a walk? It's optional. And you can spin it this way and spin it that way. And in this week's parsha, the opening of the second half of the parsha, the second parsha, the two halves, is Kedoshim to you. Find ways to make the optional holy. Find ways to make the non-prohibition obligation, just the regular stuff in life, Kadesh Atzmecha, find ways to make that part of holiness, part of doing it for Hashem. It's fair to say that being holy in the context of Torah means to be godly. So finding ways to be godly in regular stuff, that's a whole new instruction. And there are those who want to argue that because it's this week's parasha, therefore it makes it into an absolute mitzvah to find ways to do beyond the letter of the law, to sanctify ourselves, to make ourselves special and stand out closer to Hashem, more godly in areas that otherwise are not obligation. So that's a special opening to a very powerful parsha, Parshas Kedoshim. The parsha that goes from there and includes dozens of mitzvahs, which include many of them have to do with karbanis and the holiness of Hashem, but also include the prohibition against idolatry, the mitzvah of giving tzedakah, the mitzvahs for courts of law based in equality before the law. Don't be kind to the wealthy, don't be kind to the poor. Make sure that in a court of law, justice is just. And then we have the laws regarding Shabbos. Again, mention of sexual morality. Honesty in business is a big one. And honor and awe, respecting of one's parents. And a mention as well of the sanctity of life, being careful not to murder and to protect life. One of the other major things that in Parshas Kedoshim is the big mitzvah of va'ahavta l'reyacha kamoicha, to love your fellow Yid as yourself. And Rabbi Kiva famously taught, Zeh klal gadol b'Torah. This is not just another mitzvah, this is a massive rule, a great rule in the Torah. And Hillel would go on to say, Madalach sani lechavroch, have this mitzvah of love your fellow is the entirety of the Torah. Ve'idach pirusha, and the rest of the Torah is commentary on this mitzvah. And then the famous quote ends off by saying, Zil Gemar, it's a mitzvah for us to go and study how that works. In a brief explanation, the Alter Rebbe explains in the Tanya, how is it that we can say that the entire Torah can be summed up with love your fellow as yourself? It makes sense for the humane mitzvahs, the don't steal, don't murder, be kind, return your lost object, don't talk evil about others. There are many mitzvahs we can associate and connect to the concept of love your fellow as yourself. Nobody likes to be the center of someone else's attention, conversation. Nobody likes to be the one who everyone's pointing fingers at. No one likes to be robbed, and therefore we're careful not to do the same to anyone else. And that makes sense. But how does a mitzvah like fasting on Yom Kippur, connect to love your fellows yourself? How does a mitzvah like, I don't know, keeping Shabbos, putting on tefillin? How does a mitzvah of Yom Kippur's karbanis, the meal offering made of flour and oil, what does that have to do with love your fellows yourself? It seems to be nothing to do with others, and it's all about service of Hashem. And the Alter Rebbe famously, beautifully explains that actually all the mitzvahs, every mitzvah that we do, is designed to help us put our neshama before our body, to put our purpose ahead of our comfort. And in order to love your fellow like yourself, it's impossible to do so honestly unless we're able to put our purpose ahead of our comforts. And the more we practice doing that, the more ready we will be to have Am Yisrael. So in a way, every single mitzvah can be summed up with that almost barometer of how well we're doing, which is to see how much we're able to put someone else ahead of ourselves, to put someone else's comfort on the same level as ours, because that's purpose. And that would be the same as every other mitzvah, to be able to put purpose ahead of comfort. So that's a little bit of a nutshell between Achrei and Kedoshim. And I hope I was supposed to give ourselves a little extra time for a beautiful, fantastical sikha. It's actually a mix of two sikhas, but it's a great idea. And I think it's got a very practical element. We've been focusing on rebuke and telling people off for the past few weeks. And this week we take it and we put it more of a bit of a positive spin, and we talk about giving advice, offering advice to others. Is it a good idea to offer advice to people around you? Yes or no?
Depends what the advice is, depends what the situation is, and it also depends if the person has asked you to give advice, because
Oh,
that brings it into something a little bit higher than what you're actually asking. But do people actually want your advice these days?
unsolicited advice is generally unwelcome. Is that fair to say?
Depends on the situation, and
Okay.
it depends on the age of the person you're giving advice to, or to give advice but to come over kindly so that the person would take it as such and not, oh, the interfering old bag. It's different. So it's not what you say, it's the way that you say it.
Also, I'm trying to think if my mother, when she tells me how to do things better, it's always easy to listen to my mother, but sometimes it's uncomfortable also. And not because she shouldn't tell me. Of course she should tell me, and that's how I learned. That's how she educated me. But I'm
Yes,
trying
but
to point
maybe
out.
your children may think the same as they get older when you give them advice.
I'm going to agree with everything besides for one word. May. They
Oh,
absolutely feel the same. Absolutely correct, and that's what we're talking about. Claire, did you want to say something?
No, it was just as it came up, and then I can't see who was speaking, but I think it was Mrs. Abrahams by the voice. She said what I
Yes.
was going to say, so that's covered.
Unsolicited advice. Here's the question, is the way it says it on the screen. If someone offers advice that seems to benefit both the person seeking help and the advisor. So someone's asked for help, it's not unsolicited, it's solicited advice. But the advisor, the offerer of the advice, is not just giving pure, honest advice. He's giving advice, but it's also designed to benefit the advisor as well.
I would like to say one thing, though.
Please.
When you give advice,
Uh-huh.
the person receiving it might not necessarily take it on board, or let's say follow that advice. So, you have to then take a stand back. That's all.
Very good. Well said. So because you give advice, it doesn't mean we're controlling or we're
No.
going to expect. Yeah, absolutely. Well said. Fantastic. Sylvia, did you want to say something?
Yeah, the Rebbe would say that advice has to come from the heart.
Absolutely. If it comes from the heart, it enters the heart.
Yeah.
Yes. If it comes from the mind or if it comes from a different place, it doesn't go down very well always. But here we've got something which is a little bit in between. It's coming from a good place, but that good place is double. It's also good for the recipient, and it's also good for the giver. What does that tell us about the nature of the advice, if anything? Does that make it more real because it's also something I enjoy doing or benefit from? Does it make it harder to accept, easier to accept, more likely to have an effect?
It may make the person think about something a little bit more because they hadn't thought about that aspect of it until you actually gave them that advice. So it
Well
could be
said.
something really good that would come out of that.
Yeah. So if I can explain to somebody, look, you do this, it's good for you, but it'll also be good for me if you do that.
Oh no, not like that.
Okay,
No,
okay,
no,
sorry,
no,
sorry.
don't be as basic as that. If you give advice to somebody and somebody smiles and says, "Do you know, I never thought of that." That's just another way of looking at it. So sometimes give advice out of the box, and you never know. Then maybe the person will say, "Oh, that was good," or
Fantastic.
not.
Yeah, that would be great. And we were talking about somebody who did do what I just said. I said that would be great for you, and it'll also be great for me. Is that a good thing? No. Yes.
If you say that to some people these days, they're like, "What? You've just given me advice, and now you're patting yourself on the back? Come on."
I'm
Get
saying even
real.
worse than that. I'm saying not pat myself on that. I said, if you manage to do it my way, you'll be happier, and I'll be happier if you did it my way.
Oh, oh no. Depends who you're
Okay.
speaking to, doesn't
Is
it?
the outcome enough, or does the balance of interests matter? In other words, do I have to just tell them what would be better off at the net, at the outcome and the net result? Or do I have to explain why the balance of interests, why I'm suggesting that is also of their benefit? How much do I need to explain in order for it to be well received? Now, these are very specific questions, but we're going to learn, and actually, these sort of detailed questions play a big part in how to prepare ourselves before even we prepare the advice.
Mm,
Preparing ourselves before we prepare the advice usually means that the advice will come across much better and it'll be received much better as well. And that's where we want to go with this.
good.
We must not place something harmful in the path of someone who cannot see it is a mitzvah in the sixth parsha. The picture here is somebody who's left a trip hazard on the street or in a public space. And in the Torah, it tells us that that's forbidden and a person will be responsible if they did. Let's see inside. Lo sikal cheresh, you should not curse a deaf person. B'lifnei evil esite michshol, and you should not place a stumbling block before a blind person. V'yireis melekecha ani Hashem. You shall fear you are God, I am Hashem. 3 parts to the pasuk. One is don't curse a deaf person. Second one, do not place a stumbling block before a blind person. And the third thing is don't do it because I'm watching. And could be no one else is going to notice, but Hashem is watching and he will notice. Let's start off with the end of the pasuk. The end of that pasuk is generally written quite often whenever there's a situation, or often when there's a situation that someone might do something wrong and get away with it. Let's just say because they have done something that's okay, but the intention is incorrect, is not good, and nobody can know. In such a case, Hashem will say, I'm Hashem, I can see. And therefore, even if you make it look like you're doing the right thing, you're being kind, I will know if it's because you were being kind or if you were pulling fast one. And in this week's, sorry,
Can I ask a question?
please.
Is that pasuk meant to be as it's written, or is that pasuk meant to be you shall not curse a deaf person? Could that be because you think somebody can't hear very well, you can whisper it, and then it says you shall not place a stumbling block before a blind person? Could that also mean that because you're not particularly keen on somebody, don't put something in their way, and that could be anything? And then you shall fear your God, I am God, because yes, Hashem hears everything. Could that possibly be
Mrs.
meaning
Abrams,
that,
you are a Torah scholar. Absolutely. You are spot on. So on target. So on target tonight. Fantastic. That is exactly where we were going. And I was going to do the question. You've already given us the information.
I'm so
Yes.
sorry.
You are spot on, and that's exactly what we want to talk about. It does
Oh, I'm
say a
sorry.
deaf person, and it does say a blind person, but as Mrs. Abrams just said, it doesn't only mean literally a deaf person. It means somebody who doesn't hear me, and whether they are physically deaf, biologically deaf, or they're not in earshot, I still should not curse anybody.
Mm.
And equally, placing a stumbling block in front of a person who's actually blind is certainly not okay. But even if they're not physically blind, even if it's something more subtle than that, and I set someone up to trip up metaphorically,
Mm.
that would also be included. And that's where we're going to go. But the way we're going to get there is it starts off with a question which says, don't cause someone to trip up. Well, we know that mitzvah from way back when. We already know that harming others is forbidden. Why does the Torah have to repeat it with the example of a blind person? And here's an example of where the Torah explicitly tells us that we are instructed to refrain and be careful, we're prohibited from setting someone up for failure. Here's a pasuk already back in Shemos in Parshas Mishpatim. V'chi yiftach ish boyer, if a person opens a pit, or if a person digs a pit and does not cover it, and a bull or a donkey falls into it, the owner of the pit shall pay. He shall return money to its owner, and the dead body shall be his. Well, clearly, if you're going to be responsible to pay for it, you shouldn't be doing this. This is not allowed. We know you cannot set people up to fall. You have later on, similar in the Parshas Devarim, it's later on, but it's the mitzvah is there already. When you build a new house, the mitzvah tells us if it's a flat roof and people will be hanging out on the roof, you shall make a guardrail for your roof so that you should not cause blood to be spilled in your house. That the one who falls should not fall from it, from the roof. There's a mitzvah to protect people from danger. Certainly to set them up for danger would certainly not be allowed. So clearly the mitzvah of not to put a stumbling block in front of the blind is not something that we didn't know before. We definitely know that. And actually the Rambam tells us that the mitzvah, the part of the mitzvah to build a guardrail on the roof of a house, this commandment instructs us to remove hazards and dangers from all our dwellings, not just houses that have a roof. That is why we must build a protective wall around the roof, around pits, ditches, anything similar has to have health and safety protective measures so that no one in danger might fall from them or into them. Likewise, says the Rambam in the Halacha, any unsafe places must be repaired or constructed in a way that eliminates the risks and removes the danger. And that's health and safety from 2,000 years ago. The Rambam's 800 years ago. He's codifying the halachas from way back when. And that's the mitzvah to protect people and to safeguard people has always been a mitzvah included in 613 mitzvahs. So it's a mitzvah to protect others. It's certainly a mitzvah not to cause harm to others. And therefore, literally taking a stumbling block and putting it in front of someone who's blind doesn't even need to be said. It's certainly not allowed. And therefore, we're going to assume that the pasuk that tells us to not put a stumbling block behind in front of the blind means not just in its literal sense, it means that, and it also means it's more than that. The Torah warns against leaving traps or obstacles in our land or our homes so that people shall not die because of them. As it says, you shall not cause blood to be spilled in your house. The words of the three, you shall make a guardrail, is a positive commandment, while do not cause blood is a prohibition. Both of them are there. So now, the Torah mentions a blind person and teach that harm isn't only physical, it's also forbidden to mislead or take advantage of someone who lacks clarity even when the harm isn't visible. Anyone have suggestions of what sort of harm might be included in something that's not visible and therefore the person is considered blind in that regard?
You may be able to tell somebody something and they really don't understand it very well. And in that way, they are actually blind to what you're actually saying. And in that way, that could actually cause them harm because they take what you say as written and they think that's the right thing to do.
So if I educate somebody incorrectly and they take my word for it, then I've set up, they're blind in that area, and now because of me, I've set them up as a stumbling, not literally, but metaphorically,
Yeah.
I've caused them to suffer. Well said. Great example. Anyone else?
Well, I don't know if this is on the right track, but could something like leading someone down the path in a financial sort of scam type of thing, like what was it? There was this pyramid thing, wasn't there? I can't imagine that a scheme like that was very clear. But a lot of people joined it, and then, of course, when it came crashing down, then the harm was felt. I don't know if that's the sort of thing that.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. That is exactly what we're talking about. Where you have something, it's not literally someone is blind, but in the area of the financial investment, they were blind. And if I convinced them or I suggested them to invest, then I've given them bad advice and made it look like this is the way forward. That's a stumbling block in someone's feeling blind. The Saadia Gaon writes the following, and this is from the times of the Goyim, even before Rambam's times. And he writes what emerges. He says, actually, it's more specific. It's to do with setting someone up who doesn't realize that what is about to happen is not allowed in the Torah. And I'm making someone do an Avera and causing someone to transgress one of the mitzvahs. That would be an example of Saadia Gaon's. Here we go. Let's see it inside. When it comes to creating a physical hazard with one's own hands, there is a distinct prohibition derived from the verse that we had earlier. Do not let dangers in your house. You shall not cause blood to be spilled in your house. However, says Reb Saadia Gaon, the prohibition of you shall not place a stumbling block before a blind person, however, was applied by the sages to a different kind of stumbling block. Not a physical danger, but misleading someone with harmful advice that leads to sin. For example, if the question arises about whether a certain woman is permitted to a kohen and you falsely answer yes, you cause him to marry her when in fact she is forbidden. Another example is giving advice that causes financial loss, or handing a cup of wine to a nazir who's not allowed to drink wine, a limb from a living animal to a non-Jew who's not allowed to eat the limb of a living animal. This is an entirely different matter, and therefore requires its own separate warning. Says Rav Saadia Gaon, that would be one way of understanding why this pasuk is mentioned in this week's parasha, not to teach us to not put rocks in front of someone who's walking with a blind stick or a blind dog. That's already included in the other pasuk. Here we're talking about something who's metaphorically blind, and we're talking about setting them up for that sort of mistake. Here's how Rashi brings it. You shall not place a stumbling for a blind person, for a person who is blind regarding a matter. You shall not give advice that is unsuitable for them. This Rashi that we're about to learn is going to become the basis of the Rebbe's insight into how a good piece of advice is prepared. And we're going to learn it from how Rashi frames what we've just seen Reb Saadia Gaon do. Rashi quotes semi, but makes a very specific add-on to his explanation, in which the Rebbe is going to ask, where is this coming from? And it's going to be the opening, the window into teaching us how we prepare ourselves, even before we prepare the advice. Says Rashi, you shall not place a stumbling block, quote, before a person who is blind regarding a matter, you shall not give advice that is unsuitable for them. So far we understand because we've got the background to them, but let's see how Rashi gives us an example of what that might look like. For instance, says Rashi, do not say to someone, sell your field and buy a donkey with the proceeds, while in truth, you plan to cheat them since you yourself will take it from them. So if somebody owns a field and I say to the fellow, you know, it's probably a good idea for you to sell off your field and buy a good strong donkey instead. And the guy is convinced by what I have to say. And in the meantime, I'm looking for a field and I become the happy buyer of a great field that's gone for sale. And now I've given the person a piece of advice. He's trusted me, not pay for it. I've given him the donkey, but instead I've taken the field that the fellow probably should have kept. Because of me, he sold it on. Giving advice for your own gain turns guidance into self-serving behavior. And that's going to be the key. The key we're going to learn today, the Rebbe is going to encourage us. Before we give a piece of advice, ask myself honestly, is this advice for the sake of the recipient? Or is it for my own sake? Or both of ours? Because what we're learning here is that if it's both of ours, it's already very similar to my own gain and will become colored and flavored by what's in my own interest, even if it's not the best interest for the recipient. And that's going to already change how the recipient will likely receive that piece of advice. So preparing myself and being honest with myself about why I'm giving the advice and what the motive is will best position me to be able to give advice that is receivable and therefore be actionable and be able to take it on board. Let's see a few quotes, starting off with the Sikha right here. With the addition of the closing phrase in that Rashi, where Rashi adds the words, you plan to cheat them since you yourself will take it from them. That part of the story doesn't really seem to be the stumbling block. The stumbling block is to give bad advice. But Rashi doesn't say the stumbling block is just giving bad advice. Rashi is saying that there was advice, and the stumbling block is that I was planning on using out that opportunity. Rashi emphasizes that the problem is not simply causing the blind person to exchange a field for a donkey, because maybe a field for a donkey is a good calculation, since that in itself does not necessarily result in loss. So what is the stumbling block? Rashi is making it very clear he believes that the stumbling block isn't the actual advice, because could be the advice is very sound advice. Maybe it's very appropriate advice, but the motive, that itself could be the stumbling block. It's not the advice itself that's wrong, it's the intention and gain behind it that becomes a stumbling block, not to make the recipient fail if he follows the advice, but it makes the recipient fail to follow the advice. Fascinating. Fascinating insight that Rashi teaches. Let's back this up with a few texts, starting off with a Rashi in Vayikra. The Torah is warning against offering advice to someone that is unsound for them, but according to the mode of life, or the benefit of the advisor, it's good advice for the giver of the advice, the advisor of the advice. And in their situation, they wish and they're hopeful that the recipient will take on the advice for their own benefit. And this is so important. We must pause, act thoughtfully, and do what's right for others, not for ourselves, but for our praise whenever it comes to educating and influencing others. If the influencing and the education is for our own sake, says Rashi, that would be called stumbling block in front of the blind. We're not allowing the recipient to successfully take on board the advice that they need because the motive is wrong. And what might actually end up happening is that we'll end up giving the wrong advice as well, but that's something else. That's already in a different pasuk. Our pasuk in Parshah Kedoshim, the way we will become holy people, godly people, people who are switched on and connected, is by giving advice the godly way, which is to be able to think about the recipient very much, even before we start giving that advice. Here's the quote from the Rebbe, one second. This is brought out in Rashi by the example cited above, which Rashi says, do not say to someone, sell your field and buy a donkey, and then cheat them since you yourself will take it from them. Says the Sikha. It may very well be that one receiving advice will not suffer any actual loss at all from getting a donkey, since the advice is unsuitable for them, not truly needed for their situation, the Torah forbids it. For when giving advice to another person, one must think only of that person's circumstances and determine what is genuinely appropriate for them, and not exploit the situation for one's own profit, and then cheat them since you yourself will take it from them. One might argue, if the person who is blind regarding this matter loses nothing at all, then what's the problem if the advisor benefits? If there's really not going to be any loss. In other words, the recipient can go either way. And either way, it's a worthwhile investment. It's not a bad investment this way or that way. But if I give them that advice, they'll be happy, but I'll also be happy. Why would we call that not okay? That is exactly what Rashi addresses when he explains you shall not place a stumbling block before a blind person in this particular way. Before a person who is blind regarding a matter, you shall not give advice that is unsuitable for them. If it's not suited for their interest, then tell them what it is. Don't tell them that it's advice. Here, stumbling block includes even a case where the blind person has not suffered any actual financial loss, but the stumbling block lies solely in the nature of the advice itself. Advice that is unsuitable for them is not designed for their interest. The one who is blind regarding a matter believes the advisor is offering them advice and that it is in their best interest, while in reality, the advisor is cheating them, since they themselves will take it from them, deceiving them and giving advice that is really only in line with the advisor's own benefit. Now, this is an extreme case in what we're talking about, but even that, we can imagine how so many people might justify themselves in these sorts of situations. And in Parshas Kedoshim, we learn that Ahavas Yisro, which is this week's Sedra, is putting others' needs before our own, and therefore the advice that we're going to give is going to be geared and designed around what they need. Let's read one more quote, and then we want to get into the background that gives us a whole new appreciation for this message. This provides us with a remarkable lesson about the extent to which a Jew is obligated to invest him or herself in the well-being of another Yid. It is not enough that your actions happen to bring someone else's benefit. What also matters is your approach, your intention, and your purpose. When you do a favor for another, you must be completely free of self-interest, thinking only of the other person's situation, and only then will your kindness be pure, untainted by hidden motives or personal gain. It will be advice that is hearable. Now, so in summary, when helping someone spiritually, it should be clear you're doing it for their benefit and not for personal gain. What we're going to do next, I try to get myself a chunk of time, we're going to learn, that actually, starting off in the Lamets in the 70s, the Rebbe spoke very strongly about mitzvah tanks. And in the teachings that the Rebbe explained what a mitzvah tank is and why he likes the name mitzvah tank, a fascinating insight brings home this message about how we go about doing the things we need to be doing, especially in connection to others, how we prepare ourselves, how we position ourselves, even before we actually do it, or before we actually share the advice, put ourselves in the right frame of mind is a super important preparation, which doesn't even necessarily show in the details of what we're doing, but it will come right through and make it much more receivable. So we're now going to take a little detour. We're talking about mitzvah tanks, and the mitzvah tank idea is going to help us appreciate why preparing ourselves before we're doing it, being in the right place before doing the right thing, being in the right frame of mind rather than just doing the right thing is super important. It's a very Hasidic thing, and the Rebbe talks about this in this particular Zicha. So the quote starts off about mitzvah tanks, actually a quote from Tikkunei Zohar. What is the Tikkunei Zohar? Tikkunei Zohar is a part of the Zohar of the original text of Kabbalah, one of the earliest texts that we have. There are many early ones, but this is one of the most original we have. And the Zohar says the following. The Zohar is talking about the Shisha Sidrei Mishnah, the 6 orders of the Mishnayos, 6 of the books of the Mishnah, and those 6 books each have their own name. And the Zohar here uses one of the psukim, one of the verses from Yeshaya Hanavi Isaiah, in which he describes each word in that verse to be associated with another one of the 6 books of the Mishnah. The Zohar says the following: it shall be faith of your times. Faith refers to the order of Zroim, which is connected to planting and faith. Your times, which is the next word itecha, which means time, set times, is connected to the order of Moyed, which means fixed times of Yom Tov and of Shabbos and all the special times. The word strength refers to the order of Nashim, which is the stronghold of Yiddishkeit, the marriage laws. Salvation, Yeshuos, is the order of Nezikim, which keeps the law and peace in the world of tort law. Someone damaged, someone borrowed, someone owed. Wisdom Chachma refers to the order of Kachim, which is very specific and detailed laws of Karbonis, and the knowledge. Da'as refers to the order of Taharis, Taharis being very special law, which is connection. The laws of being pure and impurity is Das. Says the Zohar right at the end. V'simon, and the mnemonic. By the way, in Gemara, you often have, when there's a lot of details, the Gemara will put forth a mnemonic, because nowadays we have printed Gemaras. Back in the day, everything was learned by heart. And the Zohar is the same thing. The Zohar gives us a mnemonic to tell us how to remember the order of the 6 Mishnayos. The mnemonic is Zman Nokat. The acronym of 6 orders of the Mishnah is taking time, Zman Nokat. The Zayin Mem Nun is Royim Moed Noshim. And the last 3 is Nezikin, Kachim, and Taris. Now, that's a quote from the Tikkun Zohar. It seems a little random, a little somewhere. There are so many quotes all over, but in the Sichos, the Rebbe makes a massive deal. And this acronym is Man Nokat. The fact that the Zohar chose to give us this particular mnemonic means enormous amount to any Kabbalist. And here the Rebbe is going to teach us that actually, Zman Nokat has a message in how Mishnayos affects our life. And actually, the second half, the last 3 of these Sfarim, are going to become the 3 letters that the Rebbe uses to name his mitzvah mobiles. Actually, this is a quote from the New York Times, I believe. Yeah, the New York Times, writing about mitzvah tanks. For some 25 years, the mitzvah tanks have been a familiar sight in bustling downtown streets, college campuses, and many cities across the Union. The Rebbe bestows the Saturday march name shortly after his Israeli victory. The New York Times is quoting why the Rebbe calls them mitzvah tanks. It's a means of protecting ourselves by attacking the opposition's power, the enemy. This is a tank against assimilation, alienation. The Rebbe's positioning it introduces awareness and combats apathy and ignorance. So by putting it out on the streets, the mitzvah tank combats assimilation, where people just fall by the wayside, alienation, where people feel on their own. The mitzvah tank is big time out there in the open, and it's the spiritual weapon bringing light and mitzvahs right into the big wide world on people's doorsteps, bringing it to places that otherwise would go unnoticed. And the Rebbe calls the word to tank, because in Hebrew, there are 3 letters that you need in order to write the word tank: Tes, Nun, Kuf. And then the Sikh, the Rebbe tells us, is the same letters as the Nun, Kuf, Tes of the 3 last Sfarim of the Mishnah that the Zohar, the Kabbalah, tells us is the power of the Mishnah. Let's read this inside. First and foremost, the other person, the Rebbe is explaining at this particular Zikha, it's not got it inside, but the Rebbe is explaining why the word mitzvah tank has spun the letters around, and the first of those 3 letters is going to be the Tes. Because the order, the way it is in the Zohar, is Nun Kuf Tes, but instead we made it in Taf Nun Kuf, and the first letter has been the Taf, Tes. Why is Taharos the first thing? And in this, the Rebbe tells us that actually the power of the mitzvah tank, the power of being able, you know what, you could say the same thing with any Chabad center, any Chabad house. The same thing as any time we have an educational opportunity. Anytime we want to engage people, and we want to make sure that we are positioning ourselves to be most effective and palatable, receivable message, it's going to be super important to make sure that our first letter is Tes B'Taharis, purity. And here the Rebbe is going to explain that first and foremost, the other person must not feel that you're trying to deceive them or gain something from it for yourself, whether to make a name for yourself or any other ulterior motive. When they believe that you speak with sincerity, then their heart opens, allowing them to listen, to understand, and to recognize what you're sharing about. The mitzvah of learning Torah, or donning tefillin, or fixing mezuzah, or giving charity, or filling one's home with Jewish books. So, before anything else, one must embody the quality of purity to cleanse oneself of any self-serving interests or hidden agendas. Effectively, what the Sikh goes on to say is, Zman Nokat, Nezikin, and Kachim. Nezikin deals with all the damages, which generally can be categorized as making sure that we stay away from damaging behavior. We want to teach people to stay away from prohibitions, from things the Torah tells us not to do. Kedoshim, the state of holiness, wants us to be able to encourage and educate people to do things that are godly. So Nezikin and Kedoshim are the mitzvahs asay and mitzvahs loiseh, so the do's and the don'ts, the prohibitions and the obligations, the connection points and the safety measures, and that's a big part of what the mitzvah tank is designed to do, to make Yiddishkeit user-friendly. A mitzvah on the spot for people on the go. However, before you can put the nun on the kuf, those two aspects into practice, there must first be the test, the purity. And the purity means I have to position myself in an honest and pure motive that I'm going to do what I'm doing here. I'm going to provide this advice, educational aspect, or whatever else it is, from a place that is pure, in the sense that it's got no ulterior motives, nothing itself. It's going to be coming from within the heart, purely, which will then be receivable by the recipient's heart. The question is, how do we avoid this all too human trap of trying to personally gain from our transactions? It's healthy for people to have two-way relationships. It's healthy for people to be kind and expect or hope to have kindness in return. How do we overcome or ignore? How do we step aside from being invested or hoping to achieve something from the care that we share, and instead be completely taharis before we do Nezikin and Kedoshim? So for this, the Rebbe tells us a very interesting idea. We're going to do it quickly on the screen, but the Hebrew letters, the Hey becomes a very powerful letter that is a letter with which Hashem creates. The Hey is an aseklila, but it summarizes the machshava, dibur, ma'aseh. In the Alter Rebbe's teachings, thought, speech, and action become the three interactive tools that humans have with which to interact with reality. Thought is how we interact with ourselves. Speech is how we talk and communicate with others. And action is how we change the world around us. But each one of them is where I have an inner, subconscious inner self, and that's going to find expression deep in thought, a little further out is speech, and further still is action. But each one of these three should, in a healthy setup, follow one from the other. In a healthy setup, before I speak, I should think about what I'm going to say. And the speech, if I talk about something and I say I'm going to do something, that should, in a healthy setup, lead to action. And the action should follow that speech, what came up. And it's a chain of how the human beings can be more and more effective at the world around us, bring the Kedusha, the holiness, the godliness that's inside our neshama into the open, into the mundane and the reality of the world. And that is a healthy setup. To take it a little further, 1 second, we missed one slide. Here, the Alter Rebbe talks about the different worlds of Bria, Yitzir, Asiya, and explains how it fits into the Kabbalah. What's important to us is that that letter Hey has many letters that are similar to the letter Hey, and the Kabbalah uses the other letters to compare or maybe to highlight what the ideal is by demonstrating or contrasting how it's different than the letters that are similar but not correct. So you look at the first letter in these words. The word is Korach. He was a nasty fellow who got it wrong in these three areas. But the Kuf looks a lot like a Hey. Just the leg of the Hey goes too far down. The Reish is like a Hey, but is missing the little leg entirely. The Ches, on the other hand, is like the Hey, but there's no disconnect. It's fully connected from the top to the bottom. Compare that to the Hey. Thought, speech, and action. So the way the Kabbalah is going to teach it to us is going to be that when we have the top of the form of the letter, which corresponds to the top of the form of us, The first thing is we have to be thinking people. If something needs to be done, we have to think it through. We should also communicate, and that's the idea of speech. And here comes the other thing. There has to be a third leg. That's action, to actually do it. However, this space here, the space between the thought and speech, before moving right into action, is going to be super important. And what we're learning is that although there are three parts to thought, speech, and action, there's also a space between the thought and speech before the action that is part of the design of the healthy letter. And that's what we're going to say is the messaging that we're learning here. There has to be a concept of action, but too much action is not good. Too little action is not good. And what we're focusing on today is impulsive action. I know something to be right, and I jump in it and do it, even if I have the right idea, the right piece of advice, but because I didn't stop, I didn't contemplate before putting it into action, I can get myself into trouble. The letter Hey reminds us that thought and speech are connected, but our actions are what truly makes a difference. And the way to make sure that the action really has its effect is by ensuring that the delivery of the action. So when I actually put it into practice, it's coming with a good preparation with thought and speech and a moment to be able to taris, to purify the delivery as well. And when it's done in that way, the advice will be not tainted and not colored by what's best for me. Instead, it can be well received all the way in the extent that it can, so the recipient can have it. Let's read it inside. Here's the distinction when action is directly connected to thought without any interruption. The person really only thinking about themselves. It's a pure continuation to their own thought. All thought, speech, and actions are focused on their own benefit. For example, when giving charity, they may only give a small amount, like 18 cents, because this satisfies the internal requirements, even though they could afford to give $18 or 18 times $100, depending on the situation. But because it's just thought, speech, go into action, they haven't stopped to think. I don't need to think about myself anymore. I need to break about what I think, break about what I'm saying, and instead think about something else. When there's a break between thought and action, like the shape of the letter Hey, the person now thinking not just about their own action, but about the action itself, meaning how it will be received, what impact it will have on others. This break between thought and action, as seen in the form of letter A, not the form of the ches, indicates the need to the giver to first create their influence according to the receiver's capacity. This ensures that the recipient can receive the influence in a way that is appropriate for them. I want to end off with one quick idea that ties into what we're saying here. The concept of putting aside what I think and how I would like to say it, and taking a moment to think about what's needed purely for the recipient's end is so empowering. The way the Rebbe calls it is being able to give an infinite amount of charity. It's impossible. How can you give an infinite amount of charity? Even if I had all the money in the world, that would still be a finite amount of charity. How does one give an infinite amount of charity? And the Rebbe explains, it's when I stop thinking about how ready I am to give, how much money I can spare, how idealistic I will be. All of those are calculations about me. And that will always be limited to whatever level I'm up to. An infinite amount of tzedakah starts the calculation the other way around. I don't think about what I can afford. I don't think about what I'm ready to give. I don't think about what mood I'm in. My starting point is, what is the recipient's need? And the starting point is the recipient needs X, Y, and Z. I can't afford all of it. What can I do to help them get to what they need? That's called infinite, because it's not limited to my capacity. It's not limited to what I think I can do. The starting point is way beyond that. And this is what it means to be able to give advice. How much advice can I give? That's the starting point. There's going to be a ches. Taharis, preparing myself, giving myself that little breather and reminding myself, if I'm going to give advice, stop thinking about me for a second. Think about what the recipient needs and it's purely about them, now you're ready. That's infinite. And that's the message of Kedoshim to you. Hashem should give us the courage, the success in being able to impart good advice that will be well received, and Hashem should help, that we should be able to see good brachas in our own life and those around us. And Be'ez Hashem, we should be able to celebrate with the Hiskalos of Mashiach Take of Miyad this week, maybe even before the month of Shavuos. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining. Same time, same place next week, and looking forward to seeing you all. Zai Gazon.